Michael Williams is a Hong Kong University graduate and leading scholar of Chinese-Australian history. He is the author of Returning Home with Glory and Australia's Dictation Test, and has taught at Beijing Foreign Studies University, Peking University, and Western Sydney University. His digital project Chinese-Australian History in 88 Objects was shortlisted for the 2022 Premier's Digital History Prize. His recent book on the robed Chinese walkers and his current project, Scattered Legacy, highlight his continuing contribution to the field. These podcasts are brought to you by ChideStudyPress, publisher of Chinese-Australian History.
Hello and welcome to number 26 in the Chinese-Australian History podcast series. This one is entitled the Role of the Home Districts. And again, I like to emphasise, we mentioned it in some of the ones in the past, but basically I'd like to emphasise this idea of the various qiaoxiang, the different districts within the Pearl River Delta. Very diverse group, which might greatly impacted how we see Chinese-Australian history playing out on a city or a state level within Australia, from Melbourne to Sydney to Queensland. The differences between the Siyup people, Taishan speaking people, the Zhongshan, Lungdu people. All of this is touched upon in our discussion with our bots. It's a fairly in-depth aspect of Chinese Australian history, and perhaps you need to look at some of the other podcasts before this one can be properly appreciated. But I'm sure if you've got the time, you will do that. Thank you very much for your attention, and please enjoy the discussion.
Welcome to the deep dive. You've handed us a really fascinating stack of source material here.
It is, isn't it?
It just right away, it kind of challenges that standard story we always hear about Chinese migration to Australia.
Exactly. You know, for so long, the focus has been on the external stuff.
Right. The gold rush, the white Australia policy, all the racism, which is important, of course.
Oh, absolutely crucial. But if you only look at that, you get a very one-sided, almost flat picture of history.
So that's our mission today. We're going inside that picture. We're trying to unpack the internal forces, the real architecture that shaped everything from the inside out.
And that brings us to the key concept.
Qiaoxiang, the home districts.
That's it. This is the micro level. We're talking village, family, district. This is what determined, well, everything for most people up until the mid-20th century.
So before we dive in, let's just get the terms straight for everyone listening.
Good idea. So broadly, qiang is your native place, but we're focusing on the Joseon.
The administrative unit, the district.
Yes. And just for scale, you have to remember the Chinese Empire in the 19th century had something like 1,500 of these districts.
1,500, that's a huge number.
It's massive.
Yeah.
But what the sources show is that the vast majority of Chinese migrants in Australia came from just a tiny handful of them.
All clustered in one province.
Pretty much. All in the Pearl River Delta in Guangdong province.
And even Guangdong had over 90 districts. So we're talking about a sliver of a sliver.
And these weren't just lines on a map.
No, that's the vital thing to grasp. These districts had immense historical depth. They were ancient.
How ancient are we talking?
Well, take Zhongshan District, which is a huge source for Australian migration. It was established as a civil authority back in the Sung dynasty.
The Sung dynasty, so that's what, the mid-12th century?
That's right. So these identities, these structures, they existed for hundreds and hundreds of years before a single person got on a boat for Australia.
So you're not just from a place, you're from a piece of history.
Exactly. And that history, that weight, it creates this kind of internal map. Which brings us to our first stop. Dialect, division, and destination.
Because it went so much deeper than just geography, the districts were also divided by dialect.
Most of the Australian, the overseas Chinese spoke Cantonese, right? The Yu dialect?
They did, but with all sorts of variations. You could tell where someone was from just by listening to them speak. They were instantly distinguishable.
And then you had groups that didn't speak Cantonese at all.
Right, you had these non-Yu enclaves. The Hakka, for example, or Keji.
And the sources mention a group from the Longdu area.
Yes, and they're fascinating because they were actually inside the Zhongshan district, but their dialect was completely unintelligible to most Cantonese speakers.
That's incredible. So how concentrated were these groups?
Well, get this. The research suggests that up to half of all the Zhongshan people living in Sydney were from that one tiny Longdu area.
Wait, half? From a single sub-district?
A half. It just shows this incredible affinity, this trust, that went way beyond just your village or your family.
So this completely blows up the idea of a single, unified Chinese community in a place like Sydney.
It absolutely does. That idea is a total fiction when you look at the qiaoxiang reality. They were self-selecting, self-segregating.
And this all fits into a bigger global pattern.
A huge global process. For many, Australia was just a small part of it. The home district, the qiaoxiang, was what really dictated why you left and where you went.
It's classic chain migration, but on a hyper-specific level.
Right down to the village. The sources are so clear on this.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure, take Zhongjian again. You have specific villages, Dutu, Shenmingting, Longtuwan.
Okay.
Well, people from those specific villages almost always went to the same few places, California, maybe Hawaii, or Sydney, or Queensland.
Yeah.
The village essentially picked your destination for you.
Because the network was already there.
The network was already there.
That is so much more powerful than just saying they came from Guangdong.
It changes the whole story.
Okay, so they have this powerful internal map. But how do you keep that map alive across an ocean, across generations? That must have required some serious infrastructure.
A huge infrastructure connection. And it was built on two pillars, associations and commerce.
Let's start with the associations, the Tongxiang way, right?
The same place, regional associations. In a place like Sydney, they were everything. They essentially replaced the old guild structures from back in China.
And these weren't just social clubs for getting together?
No. This was life support, critical infrastructure for the Huaqiao.
So what were their main functions? What did they actually do?
Well, they handled life and death, literally.
What do you mean?
One of their most crucial roles was organizing the transport of bones back to the home districts for burial.
Wow.
And we have evidence of this going way back. The first letter we have about a formal organization for exhumation is from 1862.
And the scale of this was significant.
It was enormous. In Sydney's Rookwood Cemetery, in the old Chinese section, over 1,500 graves were exhumed and removed over about 75 years.
1,500.
And most of them belonged to people from the Zhongshan district. It shows this incredible multi-generational commitment to your home place.
Beyond the funerary rites, what else?
They kept people focused on their obligations back home, sending money, supporting family. They kept that mental map of the village alive.
And the other pillar was commerce, the businesses.
Equally vital. You had stores run by merchants from the same district, and they acted as these financial and logistical hubs.
So a store in Sydney wasn't just a store.
It was a node in a global network. It had links to other stores in rural New South Wales, to partners in Hong Kong, and of course, directly back to the home district.
And what services were they providing? This sounds like more than just selling goods.
Oh, it was a full-service operation. You look at the big Zhongshan firms, Wing-On & Co., Kwang Warchong. They were like a combination of a travel agent, a bank, and a legal aid office.
So they'd pay your fare.
Pay your fare, buy your ticket, help you with all the insane paperwork for the Immigration Act.
Which was incredibly complicated.
Incredibly. They'd find you a place to stay, and this is critical, they'd often lend you the money for your first remittance to send back home.
And even write the letter for you.
Sometimes the firm's scribe would write the letter to the family. Yes, they did everything.
It's no wonder so many people traveled back and forth.
The numbers are staggering. The CEDT records, that's the certificate exempting from the dictation test, they show over 27,000 people identified as Chinese passed through Sydney on those permits between 1902 and 1959 alone.
So for most people, Australia wasn't the final destination.
For many, it was a place of sojourn, a temporary stop. The goal was always to return to the qiaoxiang, but to return successful.
That really reframes the whole idea of what an immigrant was at the time. They saw themselves as temporary workers on a mission.
A mission for the family and the district.
But as you'd expect, it wasn't always harmonious. This internal architecture had its own conflicts.
Oh, absolutely. While they might have presented a united front against external discrimination, internally, the rivalries were intense.
And this wasn't hidden. People noticed it.
Observers at the time wrote about it quite clearly. A guy named J. Dundas Crawford, back in 1877, wrote about the rivalry of race between Hakka and Punti, the Cantonese.
And even within the Cantonese group, there were these deep divisions?
Yes. They were organized into two big leagues called Yik, and these represented everything, political, geographical, even sectarian differences.
And this was serious stuff.
The sources document sheer contempt between the groups. The wealthy merchants from the Three Yik League apparently looked down on the more turbulent natives of Yongshun.
And they hated the rival league, the Four Yik.
But a passion a passion which the sources say was fully reciprocated.
So did this boil over into, street fights or business sabotage?
It mainly manifested as separation. They kept to themselves. This is why you see such clear geographic footprints across Australia. Your district didn't just determine how you got here, it determined where you ended up.
The contrasts are really stark, aren't they?
Incredibly stark. Take Melbourne.
Melbourne was what?
Overwhelmingly Sa-Yap district people. Almost entirely.
And Sydney was the opposite.
Sydney was a mix of Zhongshan, Dongguan, and Gaoyao, but with very, very few Sha-Yap.
And Queensland.
Mostly Zhongshan, with really close ties to the Zhongshan folks in Sydney. So you can't understand Australian settlement without first understanding this internal map.
To really bring this home, let's get personal. The most compelling part of this research for me was the 5 stories, these family case studies.
All from the Longdu area of Zhongshan. They really show how these global family strategies actually play out.
Let's start with the Lees. Philip Lee Chun, he starts on the gold fields in 1877.
A classic story. But he becomes very successful, eventually owning the huge firm Kwong Warchung in Sydney, successful enough to bring his wife over.
But it's his children who show the complexity.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
One son becomes a barrister in Sydney, fully integrated, but another son becomes a professor of English at a university back in China.
And Philip himself.
He dies in Hong Kong, but he's buried back in the village.
So even massive success in Australia didn't break that final obligation to the qiaoxiang.
For many, Australian prosperity was the means to an end, and that end was status back home.
Okay, next up, the Changs.
Qiaoxiang arrives in Queensland in 1900, using a false ID, which shows how tough it was to get in.
He's a laborer, a market gardener, and he travels back and forth.
Many times. He lives his life in Australia, but then returns permanently to the village to live out his old age. He completes the circle.
But the story doesn't end there.
No. His son, who he sponsored as a student, now lives in Sydney. So the first generation goes back, but the next generation puts down permanent roots in Australia. The connection evolves.
Then you have the Gays, which is a different story again.
George Gay. He moves around Melbourne, Sydney, even manages a plantation in Fiji. He marries an Australian-born, part Chinese woman.
And they try to keep the connection to the village alive for their son.
They do. They send their Australian-born son, Billy, to live in the village for 3 years.
To kind of implant the culture in him?
Exactly. But the sources say that after that trip, neither the father nor the son ever went back again. The Australian reality, in the end, was stronger. The link was broken.
Then there's the story of the Hoons, which is quite heartbreaking.
It is. Louis Hoon, a market agent. His non-Chinese wife leaves him, and he takes their 7-year-old Australian-born son back to the village.
To be looked after by the family network.
The qiaoxiang is a safety net. But the son returns to Australia at 16.
And what happens to him?
He lives between two worlds. He marries in the village, but he can never afford to buy land there. He can't fully reintegrate. He ends up dying in his old age in a dormitory room above a Chinatown street in Sydney.
Wow. Trapped between both places.
Completely.
Finally, the Gaos. This seems like the success story.
On the surface, Zhao Gao builds a great business in Wollongong, brings his wife over, raises a family, and he achieves the ultimate dream. Retires to the village and builds a big house.
But he makes a really telling decision when he leaves.
He does. He sells his Australian business, but with terms that let his sons buy it back.
Why?
Because he told them there was no future for them in the village. He realized the world had shifted. The opportunity was now in Australia, not the qiaoxiang.
A huge realization for that generation.
It is. And ironically, the business went bankrupt anyway. But the story has a final twist.
Which is?
One of his daughters becomes a doctor. And her plan is to go back and turn that big house her father built into a village clinic.
A new kind of connection.
A modern connection built on the profits of the old one.
These 5 stories just show that the pull of the qiaoxiang is so complex. Sometimes it pulls you back, sometimes it pushes you away.
It's messy. It's human. And what these stories really reveal is everything that this standard Australian-based research misses.
Like the role of women.
The non-Chinese wives who went to the villages, the children who went back and forth, the texture of daily life in the village. If you ignore that, you're ignoring half the story, half a life in many cases.
So, wrapping this all up, what does this internal perspective really give us?
It tells us that this micro-level research family, village, district, is absolutely essential. It gives us a 3-dimensional history. It lets us move past the very one-sided narrative of just racism and the white Australia policy.
And it opens up a whole new set of sources that are often just ignored.
Completely ignored. We need to be doing oral history in the qiaoxiang, talking to people, capturing those memories. We need to be looking at the archives, the associations there, looking at the physical evidence.
The houses, the letters.
Mansions built with Australian money, the safes where remittances were kept, the letters sent home. It's all there.
And this is where it gets really exciting, I think. This focus allows for some incredible comparative research.
Not just comparing, say, the Zhongshan experience to the Seziap experience within Australia.
But comparing Australia to North America.
Exactly. This internal architecture is still shaping how we understand the entire global Chinese diaspora.
Which leaves a really provocative question for you, our listener, to think about. If we research these internal differences, the specific qiaoxiang dynamics that played out in different countries, could we finally start to explain some really big, long-standing historical puzzles?
It's very possible.
For instance, why was there such a distinct lack of Chinese women and prostitutes in Australia compared to the United States? Why did secret societies play such different roles? Why were fundraising methods so different from one country to the next? The answer might not be in the laws of the host country, but in the unique internal map that each group brought with them. Thanks for letting us take this deep dive into your sources.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that discussion of the role of the home districts in Chinese Australian history, or even more specifically in general diaspora history, Chinese diaspora. The Chinese diaspora, or some people call it the Cantonese Pacific, is very interesting, relating as it does not just to Australia, but to Hawaii, Fiji, San Francisco, of course, Vancouver, North America. And even touching on, of course, Cuba and Peru as well, not to mention Southeast Asia. I mean, this is all a context within which people are operating and needs to be understood, if you totally understood, even the specifics of Chinese Australian history. Once again, there are links to further readings in the notes and on the ChideStudyPress and the 88 History Objects History website. Please track them down or write to me if you want further information. That's Michael Williams signing off. Thank you very much.